It can't be real. They're just echoes of the wind, old ghosts of my exhausted mind, she murmured, her heart pounding against her ribs as the sharp scream tore through the sepulchral silence of the ruined monastery. Her young grandchildren, huddled beside her in the cold darkness, trembled with dread, and with each new wail that came from the depths of that forgotten fortress. The old widow felt hope crumble. Legend had it that no one who dared to live there left alive, but what she was about to discover would reveal a secret so ancient and terrible that it would change her destiny forever. The damp cold of the stone penetrated their bones, and the darkness seemed to swallow them. Helena embraced her grandchildren, Miguel and Sophia, feeling their small hearts beat erratically against her chest. "Shh, my loves, shh," she whispered, her voice choked with her own fear. But how could she calm two hungry, terrified children when her own world seemed to be collapsing? Sophia, the youngest, at 5 years old, hid her face in her grandmother's shoulder, her sobs muffled, while Miguel, a little older at 7, squeezed Helena's hand with desperate strength. His large, frightened eyes searched his grandmother's wrinkled face for an answer, but she had none. Only the silent promise that she would do the impossible to protect them. The days dragged on, each one heavier than the last. The little food they had brought dwindled visibly, and hunger began to gnaw not only at their stomachs, but also at the little hope they had left. The monastery walls, once a refuge, now seemed to close in on them, every echo, every shadow, a threat. Helena watched her grandchildren waste away, pallor replacing their childish flush, their smiles rare and forced. It broke her heart into 1,000 pieces. She could not allow fear and misery to defeat them. One night, as the ghostly screams intensified, seeming to come from all directions, Helena felt a surge of fury and determination. It wasn't anger at the monastery or the sounds, but a silent rage against the injustice of their situation and an unwavering determination to fight. Her grandchildren deserved more than this bleak end. They deserved a future, a home, warm food, and the security she had until then been unable to give them. With a deep sigh, Helena disentangled herself from the embrace of her sleeping grandchildren, who, exhausted, had finally succumbed to sleep. Her bones cracked with the movement, and the cold of the stone penetrated her thin clothes. She picked up the old lantern that lay beside her, her only companion of light in those depths. The flickering flame danced, casting long, distorted shadows on the damp walls. Every step was an effort, every sound a shiver down her spine. But the image of Miguel and Sophia's pale faces was her shield against terror. She began to explore. First the corridors adjacent to the small room where they sheltered, then the side chambers, empty and dusty. The monastery was a labyrinth of cold stones, with Gothic arches that disappeared into the darkness and broken windows that howled with the wind. Helena ran her hand over the walls, feeling the rough texture of the stone, searching for any irregularity, any sign of a passage, a secret. Her eyes, though tired, scrutinized every corner, every crevice. The screams seemed to follow her, sometimes distant, sometimes so close that she swore she could feel the vibration in her chest. They were wails, whispers, and sometimes a sharp shriek that made her stop, her heart racing, the lantern trembling in her aged hands. She remembered the legends, the stories of tormented souls trapped among the stones, but her practical mind, forged by years of hardship, refused to accept the supernatural. There had to be an explanation, something tangible, something she could confront. Each day, the exploration became more systematic, more daring. She ventured deeper, mentally mapping the paths, memorizing landmarks. Hunger and exhaustion were constant, but the idea of giving up was unthinkable. With each door that opened to emptiness, each corridor that ended in a collapse, frustration tightened in her chest. But Helena wouldn't let it overcome her. She thought of her grandchildren, their small, sleeping faces, and how their lives depended on her courage. Her movements were slow but firm, as she felt along the cold walls, searching for a crevice, a clue. Her eyes, though heavy with fatigue, shone with a fierce determination that no darkness could extinguish. She was a grandmother, a protector, and no ghost or legend could stop her from fighting for her family's future, even if it meant confronting her own demons and the deepest mysteries of the Shadow Monastery. Each new day, the search continued, fueled by the inextinguishable flame of her love. That morning, the cold air of the monastery seemed denser, and the screams from the previous night still echoed in Helena's memory. But the flame of her determination burned stronger than ever. She left her grandchildren, Miguel and Sofia, sleeping soundly, their small faces pale and serene for a brief moment, and with the old lantern in hand, she resumed her search. Each step echoed on the stones, a solitary reminder of her mission. She moved with the slowness of one who carries the weight of the world, but with the precision of one who has no time to lose. Her wrinkled fingers felt along the walls, searching for something, anything that could break the monotony of the cold stone. The days turned into a routine of exhaustive exploration. Helena felt the weakness of hunger, the pain in her knees, and the exhaustion that weighed on her shoulders, but the image of Miguel and Sofia, with their eyes full of fear and hope, was her fuel. She refused to give in to despair. She advanced through a seemingly endless corridor, where the ceiling had collapsed in places, leaving cracks through which the pale daylight seeped, revealing piles of rubble and ancient cobwebs. The screams, which once paralyzed her, were now background noise, a challenge to be overcome. She was certain they weren't ghosts, but something that logic, not fear, could explain. That's when it happened. In a particularly dark and forgotten part of the corridor, where the humidity was more intense and the smell of mold stronger, Helena's foot tripped on a loose stone. She stumbled, the lantern almost falling from her trembling hands, but managed to regain her balance. Looking down, she noticed that the stone was not just loose, but seemed to be part of an irregular pattern in the stone floor. With a shiver of anticipation, she knelt, feeling the roughness of the rock. With her hands, she began to clear away the dirt and small debris that covered the area. Slowly, a crevice was revealed, and through it a different breath of air, drier and older, seemed to escape. With a Herculean effort, Helena pushed the stone, which yielded with a deep creak, revealing a narrow, dark opening. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from a strange sense of discovery. She pointed the lantern inside and saw a stone staircase, steep and covered in dust, descending into the depths. The flickering light danced on the walls, revealing ancient inscriptions and symbols she couldn't decipher. The air there was stagnant, but not frightening. As she descended the first steps, the sound of the monastery's screams seemed to diminish, almost muffled, as if that passage were a shield against the outside world. At the bottom of the staircase, a secret chamber opened, illuminated by a sliver of light coming from an opening in the ceiling, revealing a breathtaking sight. There were no ghosts, only history. There, carefully preserved in niches carved into the stone, were real artifacts, ancient scrolls, jewels that gleamed with a mysterious radiance, and in the center, a detailed map of a long-forgotten kingdom, drawn with impressive precision. Helena touched the objects with reverence, feeling the texture of time. The wealth of those treasures was unimaginable, but what surprised her even more was the understanding that followed. Observing the peculiar architecture of the chamber and the strategic openings that connected it to the outside, Helena realized the truth about the screams. They were not wails of tormented souls, but the distorted melody of the wind, amplified and reverberated by the monastery's shapes and crevices, creating a ghostly symphony that deceived everyone. The anguish of the winds sweeping through the ruins was the true source of the terror. A wave of relief and overwhelming joy washed over her. Her eyes, once clouded with fatigue and fear, now shone with a light of hope. She had not found a ghost, but a treasure, and with it the explanation for the torment that had almost driven them to madness. Helena knew with unwavering certainty that her grandchildren's future had just changed forever. The monastery, once a refuge of despair, had revealed itself as a beacon of a new life. Helena felt warm tears stream down her wrinkled cheeks, mixing with the ancient dust that covered her hands. They were not tears of sadness, but of a relief so profound it seemed to wash away years of suffering. The lantern trembled in her hand, but now it was the tremor of emotion, not fear. She was there, kneeling before a secret that time had kept, and the promise of a dignified future for Miguel and Sofia shone brighter than any jewel or gold. The material wealth was immense, but the true treasure was renewed hope, the certainty that light always finds a way. With her heart still racing, but pulsing with joy, Helena picked up one of the scrolls, feeling the fragility of the ancient paper beneath her fingers. Her aged hands, which once felt along walls in search of survival, now held the key to family redemption. She couldn't read the inscriptions, but the image of the map of a forgotten kingdom spoke for itself. That was not just fortune, it was a story, a legacy of generations of monks that she, by chance or destiny, had unearthed. The altruism of those who had guarded these secrets for centuries touched her deeply. The thought of Miguel and Sofia spurred her on. They needed to know, to feel this same light that now flooded her. Carefully, Helena began to ascend the staircase, the lantern illuminating the way back to the world of shadows and privations. Each step was a step out of the darkness, a step towards life. As she emerged into the main corridor, the monastery's screams, which once terrified her, now sounded different. They were just the wind, a natural chorus of nature, stripped of its power to frighten. She smiled, a genuine and radiant smile that had not appeared on her face for a long time. She found her grandchildren still asleep, huddled together in their small, cold corner. The sight of them, so vulnerable and innocent, tightened her heart with a new wave of love and responsibility. Helena knelt beside Sofia, tenderly stroking her fine hair. The girl stirred, slowly opening her eyes, and a small yawn escaped. "Grandma?" she murmured, her voice sleepy. Miguel also woke, his large, curious eyes fixed on his grandmother, trying to decipher her emotion. Helena felt a lump in her throat, joy overflowing. How could she explain all of it? "My loves," she began, her voice choked but firm. "Grandma found something wonderful that will change everything for us." Her eyes shone with an intensity her grandchildren had never seen, and a wide, hopeful smile spread across her face. The grandchildren, accustomed to seeing their grandmother with a worried expression, looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "We don't need to be afraid of the screams anymore, and most importantly, we won't go hungry anymore." Helena extended her hand, revealing a small silver locket, one of the simpler artifacts. The lantern's light made the piece gleam, and the children's eyes widened in admiration. Sofia touched the locket with a hesitant finger, her mouth slightly open. "Is it real, Grandma?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper of disbelief. Miguel, with his more practical spirit, looked at his grandmother's face, searching for the truth in her expressions. "What is it, Grandma? What did you find that's so special?" Helena hugged them tightly, feeling the warmth of their small, fragile bodies. "I found hope, my dears. I found a new beginning for us, a future where we will have a safe home and plenty of food." The embrace, once a refuge against fear, was now a symbol of unity and promise. The monastery, which once represented the end, was now the stage for a miracle. The triumph belonged to the whole family, united by adversity and now by the unexpected fortune that would give them a new chance. The future, which had seemed so bleak, began to unfold with vibrant, life-filled colors. Sophia, with the small silver locket in her hands, felt the cold, smooth metal, but her eyes, once clouded with fear and fatigue, now widened with a childlike curiosity that had long been absent. "But how, Grandma? Where did you find this? Is it real?" Her voice, once a fragile whisper, now carried a hint of disbelief and wonder. Miguel, a little older and with a more practical spirit, watched his grandmother intently, searching for the truth in every wrinkle on her face, in every sparkle in her eyes. Hope was an almost forgotten feeling, and he feared it was just another dream, a mirage in the darkness. Helena hugged them again, an embrace that now conveyed not only protection, but a newfound security. "Grandma found a secret place, my loves, a place that held very ancient and valuable things, and most importantly, I discovered that the screams were just the wind playing with the old walls of the monastery. There are no ghosts here, my angels." She tried to simplify the complexity of the discovery, knowing that a child's mind needed clear and comforting answers. Helena's smile was gentle but firm, and her eyes conveyed a peace her grandchildren had never seen. Sophia smiled back, a small, trembling smile that nevertheless lit up her pale face. "So, we won't be afraid anymore?" Miguel, skepticism still lingering in his dark eyes, asked, his voice almost inaudible, "What about food, Grandma? You said we wouldn't be hungry anymore." Hunger was a tangible enemy, more real than any ghost. Helena nodded, her voice full of conviction and a silent promise. "No, my loves, we won't be afraid anymore. And yes, we will have food, lots of food. But we need to be patient and very, very clever. This treasure is vast, but it requires care and discretion." She explained that they would need time to understand what they had found and how they could use it without attracting unwanted attention. "For now, Grandma will bring some things from there to help us. But it's a secret, just ours. Understood?" The grandchildren's eyes filled with a new light, a mixture of fascination and excitement. The idea of a secret, of an adventure, began to replace the terror that had consumed them. That afternoon, Helena returned to the secret chamber, her steps now lighter, the lantern trembling less in her hands. Carefully, she selected a few small artifacts, not the most valuable jewels, nor the scrolls, but smaller pieces, still of great value and subtle beauty. With a light heart and renewed hope, she ventured to the nearest village, something she hadn't done in days, and traded one of the lockets for fresh bread, cheese, and a little dried meat. The merchant's gaze, upon seeing the ancient piece, was one of admiration, but Helena maintained her composure, explaining it was a family heirloom. Upon returning to the monastery, the smell of warm bread filled the small room, and Miguel and Sophia's eyes shone like never before. Helena saw in them the same flame of hope she felt in her own chest. The meal was a silent feast, each bite savored with deep gratitude, the children eating slowly, as if to prolong that moment. Sophia, her mouth full of bread, looked at her grandmother, a radiant smile. "It's the best food I've ever eaten, Grandma." Miguel, with a piece of cheese in his hand, nodded in agreement, his eyes conveying a gratitude that words could not express. From that day on, the atmosphere in the monastery began to transform. The wind's screams still echoed, but now they were just sounds, stripped of their power to terrify. Helena, with a calmer mind, began to observe the beauty of the ruins, the Gothic arches bathed in sunlight, the vines climbing the stone walls. Fear gave way to a new perspective, an admiration for the history the place held. She and her grandchildren spent more time together, no longer huddled in the corner, but exploring the safe parts of the monastery, laughing at the echoes of their voices, playing hide and seek among the broken columns. Helena told stories, no longer of ghosts, but of ancient kingdoms and knights, inspired by the scrolls she now knew were hidden. Their connection strengthened, woven by overcoming adversity and the unconditional love that united them. There were still challenges, of course. Poverty wouldn't disappear overnight, and the monastery was still cold and damp. But hunger was no longer a constant threat, and terror had been replaced by palpable hope. Helena knew that the journey to rebuild their lives would be long, but now they had the means, and more importantly, faith. The monastery, once a symbol of despair, was now a sanctuary of possibilities, a silent testament that even in the darkest ruins, the light of redemption can shine. She looked at her grandchildren, who now slept with smiles on their lips, and felt a profound peace. The future, which had once been an abyss of uncertainties, now unfolded like a map, with paths to be explored and a destiny of prosperity to be achieved. Helena watched his sleeping grandchildren, Michaela and Sophia, the flickering light of the lantern dancing over their pale faces. The future, which had once been an abyss of uncertainties, now unfolded like a map, with paths to be explored and a destiny of prosperity to be achieved. However, the joy of discovery was accompanied by the urgency of a new battle, the illness that consumed them. Their small bodies, fragile and feverish, were the top priority. Sophia's cough, still present, and Michaela's labored breathing, even in sleep, tightened the grandfather's heart. With a heavy sigh, Helena stood up, his knees cracking. The secret chamber with its treasure was the key to healing. He descended the staircase again, the lantern trembling less in his hands, now firm with purpose. Instead of the most glittering jewels, he sought smaller artifacts, pieces of silver and bronze with delicate inscriptions, which could be discreetly traded in the village. Discretion was vital. The revelation of such a fortune could bring more dangers than solutions. The next morning, with the sun still shy, Helena, with a small leather pouch containing some of the artifacts, ventured to the village again. His steps were firmer, his head held higher. The apothecary's gaze, a man with a grizzled beard and keen eyes, fixed on the piece Helena offered him, a small silver brooch with an ancient symbol. "A family heirloom, sir," Helena explained, his voice calm but his heart racing. In exchange, he asked for the strongest remedies for fever and cough, as well as fresh bread, game meat and dried fruits, foods that Michaela and Sophia had not tasted in a long time. Upon returning to the Castle of Shadows, the smell of food and the vial of medicinal herbs were like a balm for his soul. Michaela and Sophia, though still weak, sat up with a sparkle in their eyes upon seeing the abundant table. Helena fed them patiently, observing each bite, each sip of the bitter herbal tea. With each passing day, the improvement was visible. Sophia's cough diminished, and Michaela's fever slowly subsided. Their smiles, once rare and forced, began to blossom, pale at first, but gradually gaining strength. Helena spent hours by their side, reading stories he invented, stroking their foreheads, feeling the temperature of their bodies. Their connection deepened, woven not only by blood, but by overcome adversity and the unconditional love that united them. The castle, once a place of terror and despair, now resonated with faint laughter and the promise of life. The wind's screams still echoed, but now they were just a distant sound, a memory of the past, stripped of its power to frighten. With his grandchildren's health recovering, Helena began to explore the castle with a new purpose, no longer searching for hidden secrets, but for ways to make the place more habitable. He cleaned, repaired cracks, and with the help of some trusted villagers, whom he paid generously with the smaller artifacts, always maintaining discretion about the source, the Castle of Shadows began to transform from ruins into a home. Each day, a new window was sealed, a fireplace lit, a room cleaned and warmed. The future, which had seemed so bleak, began to unfold with vibrant, life-filled colors. a silent testament that even in the darkest ruins, the light of redemption can shine. With each new day that dawned over the towers of the Castle of Shadows, a new layer of hope settled upon the old stones. Michaela and Sophia, now with rosy faces and eyes shining with the vitality of childhood, ran through the safer courtyards, their laughter echoing where before there had only been oppressive silence. Helena watched them from a clean window, a gentle smile on his wrinkled lips. The fever had subsided, the cough had disappeared, and hunger, once a constant shadow, was now just a distant memory, dispelled by the smell of fresh bread and roasted meat coming from the newly restored fireplace. Heleno continued his journey of transforming the ruins into a home. With the help of trusted villagers whom he paid with smaller artifacts, always with the family heirloom story ready, the castle came to life. Cracks were sealed, roofs mended, and once gloomy rooms were now lit by torches and warmed by crackling embers. He found satisfaction in every small improvement, in every smile from his grandchildren, in every piece of life he brought back to those ancient walls. Discretion was his ally, and he strove not to arouse greed or excessive curiosity about his new fortune. However, Heleno's mind was never completely at rest. At night, when Michaela and Sophia slept soundly, he returned to the secret chamber. Not to seek more riches, but to study the map and the scrolls, trying to unravel the history behind the treasure. He felt there was something more, a responsibility that went beyond mere survival. One night, while examining one of the oldest scrolls, whose inscriptions he could barely decipher, his fingers brushed against an almost imperceptible fold. Carefully, he unfolded the paper, revealing a small hidden illustration, a seal resembling an 8-pointed star, and a few lines of text written in a different, more recent calligraphy, which seemed like a note. With the lantern closer, Heleno strained his eyes. The words, though in an ancient language, seemed familiar, as if his ancestral memory recognized them. He spent the night awake, comparing them with other inscriptions he had noticed on the chamber walls. Slowly, a phrase began to take shape in his mind, an echo of forgotten knowledge. The guardian of the lost kingdom, the key to the future, is not gold, but truth. Heleno's heart pounded. That was not just a treasure, it was a mission. The map did not just indicate a forgotten kingdom, but perhaps a legacy to be reclaimed, a justice to be restored. The discovery struck him like lightning. The treasure was not just for him and his grandchildren. It carried a greater purpose, a connection to a past that cried out to be revealed. The monks had not just hidden riches, but a story, a secret that needed to be honored. Heleno felt the weight of responsibility, but also renewed courage. His grandchildren needed a future, yes, but perhaps that future was intrinsically linked to the revelation of the truth of the lost kingdom, to the restoration of something that had been forgotten by time. He looked at the 8-pointed star seal, now with a new understanding. That symbol was not just decorative, it was a calling. The lantern's light flickered, but the flame in his chest burned with an intensity he had never felt before. The Castle of Shadows, once a refuge of despair, now revealed itself as a portal to an even greater adventure, a path to justice and the redemption of a forgotten past. Heleno spent the rest of the night in the secret chamber, his mind buzzing. Dawn painted the castle's crevices with shades of grey and pink when he finally emerged, his eyes tired but with renewed determination. The weight of the discovery was immense, but not overwhelming. It was a burden he was willing to carry, for Michaela, for Sophia, and for that forgotten kingdom that cried out for its truth. Seeing his grandchildren still asleep, huddled under the blankets that now protected them better from the cold, Heleno felt a pang in his chest. His priority was always them, their safety, their future. But what if their future was intrinsically linked to that greater mission? He sat beside Michaela, stroking her dark hair. The girl stirred, a small smile on her lips. Sophia, with her lighter sleep, opened her eyes and yawned, stretching her little arms. "Grandpa, didn't you sleep?" Her voice, though still a little hoarse, was a balm. Heleno smiled, a tired smile but full of love. "Grandpa was thinking, my loves, thinking about how we can make this castle even more our home." He couldn't tell them about the lost kingdom yet. They were too young to understand the weight of such a secret. But he could give them a sense of belonging, of purpose. That day, Heleno did not descend to the secret chamber to seek more artifacts for trade. Instead, he dedicated himself to a different task. With the help of the villagers, who now regarded him with more respect and even a little curiosity, he began to organize the more habitable rooms of the castle. The idea was to create a space where the scrolls and the map could be studied more calmly, away from curious eyes, but close enough for him to care for his grandchildren. He chose a room on the upper floor with a large window overlooking the inner courtyard. It was a room that, though in ruins, still had an intact fireplace and walls that could be restored. Michaela and Sophia, with renewed energy, helped as they could, carrying small pieces of wood or watching their grandfather with fascination as he worked. Their laughter filled the space, chasing away the shadows of the past. Heleno watched them, his heart warmed. Their joy was the fuel for his own courage. At night, while his grandchildren slept peacefully, Heleno sat by the fireplace, the flickering light dancing over the scrolls he had brought from the chamber. He tried to decipher the inscriptions, comparing the symbols with the 8-pointed star seal. The language was ancient, but persistence was his ally. He felt that each line, each drawing, contained a piece of the truth he needed to unravel. The justice of the lost kingdom was not just an abstract idea. It was the story of people, of a legacy that had been silenced. He thought of the monks who had guarded the treasure, of the altruism of generations who kept alive the hope that someone one day would discover the truth. Heleno felt connected to them, a bridge between the past and the future. Days turned into weeks. The Castle of Shadows, once a place of terror and despair, was now a vibrant home, full of life and purpose. Heleno's study, though simple, was his sanctuary, where he delved into the history of the lost kingdom. Michaela and Sophia, in turn, flourished. Their joyful voices were the soundtrack to the new life in the castle. They played in the courtyards, helped their grandfather with daily tasks, and occasionally peeked through the study door, curious about Grandpa's magic books. Heleno knew the path would be long, and the challenges many. The neighboring village, though grateful for the improvements the castle brought, trade, work for the villagers, still maintained a certain distance, a reluctance to fully approach the Castle of Shadows. Distrust was a subtle but real obstacle. Heleno needed to find a way to integrate the castle into the community's life, to prove that light had, in fact, overcome the shadows. He knew that the truth about the lost kingdom could be the key to this connection, but the right moment to reveal it had not yet arrived. He felt that justice and redemption were not just for the past, but also for the present, for the community living in the shadow of the castle. Heleno felt the weight of that truth, not as a burden, but as a sacred responsibility. Justice and redemption were not just for the distant past of a forgotten kingdom, but for the present, for the simple souls living in the village, in the shadow of the Castle of Shadows. He knew that distrust, woven by generations of legends and fears, would not dissipate with a simple nod. He needed more than bread and work. He needed a bridge, a link that would connect the heart of the castle to the heart of the community. That night, the lantern's light cast dancing shadows over the scrolls in the study. Heleno, his brow furrowed in concentration, traced the ancient lines with a wrinkled finger. He had discovered that the 8-pointed star seal was not just a symbol of royalty, but also an emblem of sharing and protection. One of the texts, which he struggled to decipher, spoke of an ancient tradition. In times of scarcity, the kingdom offered its surplus to the neighboring village, ensuring that no one went hungry. It was a pact of solidarity, a legacy of altruism that the monks had preserved. A faint smile appeared on Heleno's lips. That was more than a story. It was a guide. The key to the past's redemption lay in recreating that spirit of sharing in the present. He imagined the joy on the villagers' faces, their surprise at receiving unexpected help, not as charity, but as a gesture of goodwill coming from the feared castle. The next morning, Michaela and Sophia, with the renewed energy of childhood, peeked through the study door. Michaela, the most curious, pointed to the scrolls. "Grandpa, what are these magic books? Do they tell stories of knights?" Her eyes sparkled, and Sophia, clinging to her sister's skirt, nodded, a small smile on her lips. Heleno closed the scrolls with reverent care and knelt to embrace them. "They are very old stories, my little ones. Stories of a time when people cared for each other, and kindness was the greatest treasure." He held them close, feeling the strength of their small bodies. Their innocence was a constant reminder that the future needed to be built on solid foundations of hope and generosity. Later, while one of the villagers, a man named Tomas, helped repair a leak in the roof, Heleno took the opportunity to talk. Tomas, a man of few words but honest eyes, accepted the payment with gratitude. "Thank you, Master Heleno. The castle is becoming more welcoming, but there are still those who say the spirits don't like so much life here." He lowered his eyes, a remnant of the old superstition still present in his voice. Heleno nodded, understanding. "I understand, Tomas, but I believe the true magic here is that of unity, and perhaps together we can show everyone that the castle can be a place of blessings, not curses." He observed Tomas's thoughtful expression, a small glimmer of hope in the villager's eyes. That night, Heleno did not study the scrolls. Instead, he made plans. With the smaller artifacts, he could buy seeds, tools, and perhaps even some livestock. The idea was simple: to use the fortune to reactivate the fertile lands around the castle, which had been abandoned out of fear. He would create a community garden, offer work, and share the harvest with the villagers. It would be a return to the tradition of the lost kingdom, a gesture of altruism that would speak louder than any legend. He looked at the 8-pointed star seal on the main scroll, now with a new meaning. It was not just a symbol of power, but of service. Heleno felt courage flow through his veins, a flame ignited by the promise of justice and the hope of a future where the Castle of Shadows would, at last, be a beacon of light for all. Heleno wasted no time. The next morning, with the sun stretching over the castle towers, he was already on his way to the village, his small leather pouch heavier. It wasn't just artifacts for food, but for wheat, barley, and vegetable seeds, as well as plows and hoes. He sought out the usual merchant, a man with a sun-weathered face. Upon seeing the quantity and quality of the pieces, the merchant's eyes widened. "Master Heleno, it seems your inheritance is vaster than I imagined." The voice held admiration and curiosity that Heleno tried to deflect. "It's an ancient inheritance, my friend, and I intend to use it to bring life back to these lands. I need everything for a large garden." News spread quickly. Old Heleno, the guardian of the Castle of Shadows, was buying seeds and tools, and spoke of cultivating the abandoned lands. At first, there was skepticism. Who would plant so close to a feared place? But the need was great, and the offer of work and sharing the harvest was tempting. Tomas, the villager who had helped with the roof, was one of the first to come forward, his eyes still carrying doubt, but hope shining brighter. "Master Heleno, if you truly intend to do this, I will help you. My hands are accustomed to the earth." With the help of Tomas and a few more villagers who cautiously joined, Heleno began to work. The days were long and exhausting. The land, long untouched, was hard and full of weeds. Heleno, despite his age, worked side by side with the younger ones, his muscles aching, but his spirit unyielding. Michaela and Sophia, with their health restored, ran through the newly prepared fields, their laughter mixing with the sound of hoes. They helped carry smaller stones, water the seeds, and the joy on their faces was the greatest fuel for their grandfather. "Grandpa, will we have lots of carrots?" Sophia asked, her eyes wide. "And apples, Grandpa?" Michaela added. Heleno smiled, hugging them tenderly. "We'll have everything, my little ones, if we work with love and patience." The vision of the community garden, once a distant dream, began to take shape. The rows of tilled earth, the small seedlings timidly sprouting, were a silent testament to the transformation. The villagers, initially reluctant, began to feel part of something greater. Distrust gave way to a sense of community, of shared purpose. The castle's legends, though still whispered on dark nights, lost their power in the face of the promise of fresh bread and abundance. Heleno observed the change in their gazes, in their gestures. Conversations became more open, smiles more sincere. He saw the justice of the lost kingdom reborn there, not in crowns or thrones, but in the solidarity among people. One afternoon, as the sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, Heleno sat with Tomas under the shade of a newly planted tree. "Tomas, do you see? The earth holds no grudges. It gives back what we plant with care." Tomas nodded, a thoughtful look. "It's true, Master Heleno. And perhaps people don't either. Perhaps the castle isn't as cursed as we thought." A sincere smile spread across the villager's face. Heleno felt his heart overflow. The connection was being woven, thread by thread, with each seed, with each child's laughter, with each gesture of trust. The castle of shadows, once a symbol of fear, was becoming a beacon of light that guided not only his family, but an entire community towards a future of prosperity and unity. The promise of justice, once a secret in scrolls, now blossomed in the earth, fueled by the altruism and courage of a grandfather who dared to dream. Spring brought not only vibrant green to the lands around the Castle of Shadows, but also a new hope that blossomed in the hearts of the villagers. The seeds planted with such effort by Heleno and his helpers had sprouted, and the rows of wheat, barley and vegetables stretched like a promising carpet under the sun. The smell of wet earth and young sprouts replaced the mold and dust that once dominated the air. Michaela and Sophia, now strong and full of life, ran among the crops, their small hands helping to water the most delicate seedlings, their laughter echoing freely. Heleno watched them, his eyes moist with gratitude. Their joy was the most precious harvest of all. Tomas, who had become a loyal right-hand man, worked tirelessly alongside Heleno. His initial distrust had transformed into deep respect, and he was now the old widower's greatest advocate among the villagers. "Master Heleno, the harvest will be abundant this year. Our baskets have never been so full," he exclaimed one day as they observed the fields. Heleno smiled, a smile that reached his eyes. "It is the fruit of our labor, Tomas, and the generosity of the earth. But more importantly, it is the fruit of our unity." Despite the visible success, Heleno noticed that some villagers still maintained a cautious distance. Whispers about the castle's legends and spirits had not completely vanished. Material prosperity was undeniable, but full acceptance, the true connection of hearts, was still a subtle challenge. He knew that the truth about the lost kingdom, the legacy of altruism the monks guarded, was the key to breaking the last barriers. But how to reveal it without arousing fear or greed? One afternoon, while Heleno was in the study, examining a scroll that described the sharing rituals of the ancient kingdom, Michaela and Sophia entered, their faces smudged with dirt and their eyes shining. "Grandpa, we saw a big bird with blue feathers high up on the tower," Sophia exclaimed, pointing to the window. Michaela added, "He looked like a guardian, Grandpa, watching over the field." Heleno hugged them, the warmth of their small bodies calming him. The mention of guardian and watching over the field sparked an idea in his mind. The kingdom was not just about sharing food, but about protection, about a vigilant eye on the well-being of all. He remembered a passage in the scrolls that spoke of a harvest festival, where the king and queen presented themselves to the community, not in luxurious attire, but with hands soiled with earth, symbolizing their connection to the people and the land. It was a moment of celebration and renewal of bonds. Heleno realized he needed a similar gesture, something that would unite the castle and the village in a shared celebration, showing that the new era was not about power, but about service and community. That night, under the flickering light of the lantern, Heleno not only studied the scrolls, but also sketched plans for a grand harvest festival at the castle. It would be an opportunity to show everyone that the Castle of Shadows was no longer a place of curses, but a center of life and unity. He imagined abundant tables, music and laughter that would drown out any whisper of fear. It would be his way of reintroducing the spirit of the Lost Kingdom, not with ancient words, but with present actions. He knew that organizing it would be an immense challenge, and the villagers' acceptance uncertain. But the sight of Michaela and Sophia running freely, the promise of a secure future for them, and the belief in the justice of the Lost Kingdom, gave him the necessary strength. The 8-pointed star seal on the scroll seemed to shine with a new intensity, not as a symbol of a distant past, but as an invitation to build a future. Heleno felt that this festival would be more than a celebration. It would be a rite of passage, a decisive step to seal the connection between the castle and the community, and to finally unravel the truth he held in his heart. The preparations for the harvest festival consumed Heleno. He and Tomas, with some daring villagers, worked tirelessly. Large wooden tables were set up in the castle's central courtyard, once silent and now bustling with activity. Miguel and Samuel, with inexhaustible energy, ran through the preparations, their laughter filling the space. "Grandpa, can we help decorate?" Miguel asked, his eyes shining at the sight of the wildflower garlands. Samuel, more timid, held his brother's hand, observing everything. Heleno smiled, his heart heavy with a mixture of fatigue and hope. In them he saw the reason for his effort, the promise of a future to build. News of the festival spread. Curiosity was great, but fear persisted. Heleno knew it was the crucial moment. He had rehearsed the words, how to reveal the truth about the Lost Kingdom and the altruism of the monks. The scroll with the 8-pointed star seal was safe in his chest, a burden and a promise. He needed the villagers to see not just a treasure, but a legacy of unity and protection. Finally, the day arrived. The afternoon sun painted the castle towers golden. Slowly, the villagers began to arrive, hesitant steps gaining confidence as they saw the abundant tables and colorful garlands. Children, once forbidden, ran freely, drawn by the smells of fresh bread and fruits. Adults, with empty baskets, watched Heleno, who awaited them with a welcoming smile. Tomas, beside him, waved to his neighbors, a silent pride on his face. Heleno felt a lump in his throat. It was now. He climbed onto an improvised platform, the scroll hidden. Miguel and Samuel pressed against his legs, feeling their grandfather's tension. Silence fell over the courtyard. Heleno took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the faces, seeing hope and distrust. "My friends," he began, his voice trembling but resolute. "For a long time, this castle was a mystery and a fear for you. For me, a refuge of despair. He paused, but the shadows were not of spirits, but of forgotten truths. He took out the scroll, unfolding it carefully. The 8-pointed star seal shone under the setting sun. "This is a map," he continued, "to a lost kingdom, not of gold and jewels as many think. It is a kingdom of justice, sharing, altruism." He explained how the monks had preserved the history of a people who cared for each other, shared harvests, protected the vulnerable. He spoke of the screams, revealing them as mere echoes of the wind, amplified by the ancient architecture. "This castle is not cursed," he declared, his voice firm. "It is blessed with the memory of a legacy we can revive." The villagers listened, their expressions changing from skepticism to surprise and admiration. Some approached to see the map. Tomas's eyes were moist. Miguel and Samuel looked at their grandfather with respect. Heleno extended his hand to the crowd. "We are all part of this legacy. This festival is not just a celebration of the harvest, but a promise. Together we can build a future where..."